What's going on, everybody? I hope everyone is having a great Friday afternoon. I got a very special guest, and this is a premiere episode, the voice of college football. I've been on his show several times. Everybody and their mom knows him. Mark Rogers, welcome to The Scoop. It truly is an honor to come on my show, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, Paul, I appreciate it for all the times that you've come on my show and contributed. I guess I owe you a number of times. So it's finally payback time where I get to give back a little bit.
Mark, the people love you, man. If someone is watching right now, where can you direct them to your YouTube channel if they've never watched you before?
Yeah, so our main channel's at Voice of College Football. So just go to the YouTube search bar, put in either Mark Rogers TV, or you can just put in Voice of College Football, either one, and you should be able to find me pretty high on that list in regards to finding the channel, where we've got tons of videos. You don't necessarily need to subscribe. Just dive in if you love college football. I'm sure you're going to be able to find your team, which I'm guessing is going to be Miami. We got a lot there, and you may even see Paul show up once or twice in there. And we also have a Miami channel, but I won't go into the whole iteration of the 22 team channels, but we can start right there on the main channel at the Voice of College Football.
Speaking of the Miami Hurricanes, Mark, you've had many people on your show, Cam Underwood, Wholesome One, myself. What's kind of your outside perspective on the Miami Hurricanes football program after the spring game? I know it's a very broad question, but where do you think we stand as a program? Where do you think our strengths and weaknesses are?
There's no question that the recruiting footprint there in the entire state of Florida, but specifically to the southern portion of the state, is just ridiculously phenomenal. And the school, the administration on down from the top has not been able to take advantage of the talent that's there, as was the case 20, 25 years ago and beyond. We see indications that that's changing, and I think that's a huge, for me, component into getting this program where it used to be and where Miami fans want it and believe it to be. There are NFL players on this team, just like there have been in seasons in which they've won 6, 7, 8 games, but there's not enough of them, and there's not enough of the elite high caliber ones, because even if you look at the NFL draft, there's a difference between Alabama, Ohio State, and let's say Penn State, Michigan. There's for example, like Michigan will have as many players drafted as they did last year as Ohio State. But there's a difference between having top 10, 15 picks in the NFL draft, like a Jalen Phillips, and then having somebody else drafted in the 5th or 6th round. There's no question, just like the recruiting rankings. Are you going to bring in top 50 to 100 players in the nation, or are you going to bring in top 300 to 350 players? And that's not to say that you're not going to build your program and your roster on those top 300 to 350 players. And some of them are going to turn out to be all conference players, NFL stars. But the great majority of them are going to come from the ranks of the top 50, the top 100 in the nation. If you look at the recruiting rankings over the past 5 years or so and beyond that, it's just packed with and saturated with Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and those few schools. And it typically takes a while before you see Miami show up, and that has to change. And again, you're seeing an indication, especially from some of these guys that we're going to see on campus here in just the next couple of weeks, that show up, that are just, in a sense, different kind of dudes than have shown up for the most part over the last 6 or 8, 10 years.
Absolutely. I mean, Manny Diaz, it's a new era. It's a new tenure at the University of Miami. He's got a big unofficial list come June 1st. Let's see. Maybe they'll get some commitments. Right now, we currently only have one player committed in the class. Strangely enough, usually I feel like a quarterback shouldn't be your only player committed in the class. That's our only guy committed right now. Mark, is this kind of a red flag in your opinion compared to other programs that Miami only has one commit so far in the class, or it's way too early? Because a lot of fans, not a lot, but there is discussion that, hey, what's going on? Like, we need to get the ball rolling in recruiting us. There's some fans already a little bit worried, and I'm curious because you cover a lot of programs: Nebraska, Texas, Florida State, Alabama, you name it, Oklahoma. You cover it all. So, love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, if this was Alabama, I would say absolutely don't worry. Alabama was actually like 75th in the country at this time the last couple of years. So that means absolutely nothing for them. They're a different deal. Miami's in that tier that I believe that they're a top 15 to 20 team and program. And I think those are not necessarily the same term. Some teams are going to trend up and they're going to have a really good year in 2021, and maybe their program's not quite there. Or vice versa. They may have a down year on the field, but their program's in better shape than the actual team this year. But
Right.
I think Miami's program and team are pretty much at that top 15 to 20 level. Am I concerned? I would be more concerned if this was a normal year, meaning a normal non-pandemic year in which the players had been able to get on campus, have those official visits, make those decisions. I heard some numbers the other day. I'm not going to be able to recite them exactly, but it is just a fraction of the number of players who have committed this year. This is across the country, FBS football, that have committed this year compared to the typical year. So there's a ton of guys just holding out, waiting, saying, hey, I got to see the deal. I got to be there in flesh and blood to see to see campus, to meet with the coaches, face to face, and then make that call. So if those numbers are that alarming in 2 months, then I'd start to be concerned.
All right. Well, you mentioned, a lot of players are, they don't really have a place to play per se. You have some players now who may have to play at the FCS level that previously could play Division I football. Teams are utilizing the transfer portal a lot, Mark. I feel like Manny Diaz was one of the kind of the staples of utilizing the transfer portal, kind of opening the floodgates towards, the free agency of college football. We've seen Lincoln Riley utilize it for the quarterback position. What are your thoughts about the transfer portal and its relationship with the Miami Hurricanes? Because if you noticed, all of our players that get drafted, besides Gregory Rousseau and Brevin Jordan, that I can think top of my head, they all come from the transfer portal, and a lot of our best players, Bubba Bolden, for example, he's from the transfer portal as well. So do you like the idea of Miami utilizing the transfer portal?
I think where Miami's in a little bit of a unique situation, and they could probably take this to their advantage, would be think about all the players that escape Florida and South Florida in particular. Nebraska comes to mind. So Nebraska is not recruiting at an elite level. They're recruiting well. They're in the top 25, but they've taken a lot of players from South Florida. Maybe not the elite players, but some really good, better than program type players. But those players have generally been a bit shown that they didn't necessarily like the decision they initially made.
Okay.
And I think that Miami could maintain track of a lot of players that got away. And I'm just picking on Nebraska, but this could be anywhere because, as you well know, there's a lot to sell in South Florida. There's a lot to sell about this school, about this campus, about the program, about the area, the weather, everything involved, that even if some of those players get away initially,
right,
they may get a little homesick, more so, and that could be the case for any area, any school where a player that got away is a little homesick 2 years later. But I think even more so for a place that has as much to offer as Miami. So be aware of those players that got away that might want to come back.
I think something that's been missing at Miami, I know recruiting, losing players to other programs that are from South Florida, I know that's been a big issue. But, I think it's your development with the coaching staff, the backbone of your football program. And I think that's something that's been missing. Take Pat Fitzgerald of Northwestern, for example. He doesn't get 4-star, 5-star recruits. He really just bases it off of, 3-star recruits that are pretty highly educated. They have a great GPA. They're good academically, not only on the football field, but they take academics seriously. So look at the development he's done at Northwestern. And I hope Miami can kind of, take that model eventually. And maybe Manny Diaz is the right guy. We'll find out. But hopefully we can start developing players and make the most out of these guys because, we're always kind of late to the party. Offensively, we were running an old school pro style offense with Mark Richt for the longest time. That we were running a defensive scheme with Mark D'Onofrio as our defensive coordinator. And we had all these players. You had a Jeff Thomas at wide receiver, Tyreek McCord at the defensive line. I think that he was coming in as a linebacker to start off his career. Then they switched on him. They put on a bunch of weight on Anthony Chickillo, ended up having a nice career at the linebacker position for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So those are just some players off the top of my head, but we've really just we haven't made the most out of the talent we have at the University of Miami. And I'm hoping we can get a staff that really develops its players, and hopefully we have one right in place.
And if this didn't strike anybody in this program over the last 5 to 10 years, you would think facing Wisconsin 3 times in the last 10 years and getting slapped in the face would wake up some people to say, you know what? They don't recruit anywhere close to what we recruit, and they've got a better football program, and they've whipped our rear ends 3 times, and they always finish in the top 10 to 15 in the country. So why can't we do, not that you want to copy their scheme or anything, that they're in a different part of the country, they recruit different kind of players, but just the shock of they recruit in the 30s and 40s and develop teams that are top 10 to 15 teams in the nation. They don't have as good of athletes as we do, but they develop them. And Miami seems to bring in players that are at a certain talent level, a fairly high talent level, and they leave school and they're the same player. They're not much better. And they get to the NFL oftentimes just based on their own talent, not that they got better those 3 to 4 years in college, and they're a 5th or 6th round choice where they might have been had the potential of being a 1st round choice. And I just see more of that at Miami than I do at other top schools.
Mark, I've been asked this question several times. How does Alabama get over that limit of number of recruits when they just bring in someone from the transfer? Do you have any information around that? Because it's a common question. A lot of people are curious. Is it just the typical kind of Nick Saban gets away with things kind of quote, or are you kind of curious as well?
I'm curious as well. I don't have an answer for you. I would never in a million years accuse anybody of anything if I don't know. So I won't do that. At the same time, I've never heard an explanation. So you would think that there would be an explanation.
Right.
And I know Alabama's running a tremendous football program, obviously, but they can't be that much smarter than everybody else. There's just
right.
And there's too much circulation of coaches. Nick Saban has lost as many, if not more, coaches over the last 5 to 10 years than anybody. So why don't they take the trade secrets with them? Mike Loxley's up at Maryland right now, trying to build a pretty good football program. He's had a couple of good recruiting classes. You would think, hey, didn't he learn the system, the number system there at Alabama, to take that with him?
No, 100% agree. No, the NCAA, I get it. Like, they're figuring out a way with the number system. They're figuring out certain ways to land recruits, and hey, they're playing it to their advantage. And you're seeing coaches that come from Alabama go to other programs as well. They're basically, you learn from your protege. So whatever information they're getting is from Nick Saban, they're bringing it to other programs. We see that with Kirby Smart, another example. So, hey, obviously other programs are, having those coaches, and they can't be, I understand they're winning all the games, but I don't think they're just doing something completely different nobody else is.
I'm going to take
Mark.
that question. I'm going to take that question to my next Alabama guest.
That's a great question to ask them. And speaking of the Alabama Crimson Tide, Mark, first game of the year, Miami, Alabama. Do not ask me. I don't know why we schedule our opponent's first game of the season. I like to get in a couple games and then schedule your opponent. We haven't done well in neutral site games in a while. What's your what's your perspective on this Miami versus Alabama game at the new stadium in Atlanta?
I like the matchup. I don't like the matchup. What I mean by that is anytime that two name programs get together, different conferences, of course, that we don't get to see typically play, I'm all for the good teams, the best programs playing. So anybody who's heard me rant about scheduling in college football knows that. On the other hand, this isn't necessarily now, if Miami pulls a stunner, number one, or if they stay in the game, then different deal. But if they play a similar game to what they played against Clemson, let's say last year, where they're overmatched, they're not completely annihilated, but they're overmatched. They don't belong in the game. They're outclassed pretty much at every position. If it's that kind of game, 42-17, where it's never a game in the second half, then I'm not going to learn a whole lot about this team. Now, if they play Alabama close, then I'm going to say, wow, that's a confidence builder. That's something to build on. That's a great indication of what they can do. But if this is 42-17, as I'm expecting right now, I personally don't learn a whole lot from that. We had a discussion, I'm sure, Paul, at some point that I was really looking forward to that North Carolina game last year because we had some discussions about, okay, it was Virginia Tech last week. They escaped by 1. It was North Carolina State. They had to come back in the fourth quarter. Those are all okay teams, decent teams, top 40, 45 teams, but they're teams that Miami should be not every time, but typically beating by 21, 24 in that range, and they're slipping by them. So I was waiting for them. And then, of course, the Clemson game was early in the season. They weren't up to the challenge. So I was waiting for that team that they could play on their level to see, okay, what are they going to bring against a top 15 team in the country? Because I think Miami is generally about a top 15 team in the country. So what's this going to look like? Well, we found out. So in this Alabama game, the only thing I don't like about it is if it turns out to be another Clemson, then I would rather have seen Miami play Texas, Penn State, Iowa, somebody on their level to see, is this going to be another North Carolina? They're going to get outclassed and outcoached? Or, okay, they can play with Penn State. They can play with and beat Texas or Iowa or somebody at that range, their range.
Right.
That's the only thing I don't like about it.
I 100% agree because I like Alabama. They're used to the bright lights. They're used to these, matchups, neutral site games. This is another walkthrough routine for them. Miami, on the other hand, they're not really used to the big games. They're really not. So, if this is another Clemson game, North Carolina, where they're just not in the game whatsoever, I'm worried how that translates to week 2, week 3. But like you said, if Miami can pull off the win, let's say, or is in a dogfight all 4 quarters, and they're competing in the game, and it's down to a final drive, and they have Nick Saban sweating on the sidelines, this can go really well as motivation for the program going into the rest of the season. And I think this is a program evaluator game. Once again, Manny Diaz, you make a lot of noise in the offseason. Regular season, not a lot of action. That's the bottom line. And Mark, speaking of the offseason, we just saw the spring game about a month ago, I want to say, that just passed. Where do you think Miami stacks up well against Alabama, and where do you think they're just very vulnerable at?
So Miami at this standpoint, the other thing I don't like about this matchup is, unfortunately for the Canes, is that De'Ara King got hurt. Now, is he expected back for the Alabama game? Yes. By all indications from what I hear, is he ahead of the curve? Is he just busting through markers in his rehab? Yes. All that is great. It speaks a lot to his work ethic and his athleticism in coming back from injury, but he's not going to have the kind of offseason and the kind of summer to prepare himself as he typically would, being 100% healthy for an opponent like Alabama. And to your point, that even accentuates or emphasizes the thought that, man, I wish this was week 2 or week 3. So from that standpoint, I don't like that because it, again, puts your best player at a disadvantage in trying to prepare for this game. In terms of the matchup, I think that, I love your backfield. I think that Miami's running back situation's in better shape than it's been in how long? 20 years? Almost?
It's been, I mean, it's interesting because, God, I wish I had the numbers because I think in 2017, we had Mark Walton, Travis Homer, and DJ Dallas on the same running back room. I would rather take that group than the one we have now, if I'm being honest.
No, that's
So,
good point.
yeah, that's a good duo. I think all three of them actually played in the NFL. There was an off the field issue with Mark Walton, but all three of them did get their opportunities in the NFL. So, I think it's a good room. I'm just curious how they're going to distribute the carries.
I'm concerned with this linebacker core because they're going to have to play in space against a passing game that will, okay, you go from, if you're Alabama, Steve Sarkisian and what he did on offense in mixing and matching and scheming to somebody similar in Bill O'Brien, who's, regardless of what you say about him as a head coach in the NFL, he's a top offensive mind. He knows what he's doing. And so it's one thing to say, I'm not comfortable with the secondary against these wide receivers, although I think that matchup's not going to be as much of a mismatch as you may think on the surface with Tyreek Stevenson in the lineup now versus an Alabama receiving core that's still going to be loaded with talent, but they're inexperienced outside of their number one guy versus those underneath routes. That's going to be a lot of the running backs, the slot receivers against those linebackers trying to chase those guys down in space. I think that could be an issue.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. One issue I'm definitely seeing is our linebacker position unit. I feel like we're very undersized. You put a big body running back because they're going to be running a power RPO offense. I think they're going to be running the football heavily against Miami. Bryce Young's first game as a starting quarterback, they're going to ease in the moment for him. And I think they're really going to slowly try to run down Miami. And then maybe third, fourth quarter, they'll start airing it out a little bit, or maybe more as they get closer to the red zone. But Alabama's got some big body running backs. And I'm curious with Miami's, personnel right now, how do we handle their run game? And it's going to be very interesting. But one thing, when I spoke to an Alabama analyst, he told me that their offensive line unit is a big question mark. And one issue they had against Duke, I think it was in 2019 when they played. I think it was in Atlanta as well. Could be wrong on that. They were rotating their offensive line units consistently to get a flow going. They didn't have an identity on their offensive line. They didn't really have a starting five yet. So that entire first half was a struggle for Alabama because of their offensive line. And this is one of the weaker position units right now for the Alabama Crimson side, is their offensive line. So if that doesn't get the ball rolling first half, Miami may be in a fight. And one thing, they have to win the turnover battle, and they need to create turnovers and score off of turnovers. So it's going to be a very interesting game. And he also told me, Mark, in order to beat the Alabama Crimson Tide, you need to have A+ quarterback play. Johnny Manziel, Joe Burrow, that was their Heisman games against Alabama. What do you think about De'Ara King in this matchup?
So De'Ara King, to me, not just him as an individual player, but the entire offense and his rapport with the wide receivers took a large step in the right direction in the NC State game. There was a number that I remembered going into that game where it was the week before that they finally started to hit on some long shots against Virginia. They had one of the worst plus 30-yard passing rates in college football for the first 5 or 6 games of the season. it was awful. And then they hit a few shots against Virginia, and then suddenly against NC State, a good team, and I don't even think that was just the Eric King. I was think that it looked like something that they intentionally worked on, that timing of the Eric King and the wide receivers, and he was just dropping the ball in the bucket. Of course, he's got to have that kind of game against Alabama, and it helps when the wide receivers actually catch the ball too. So when they hang on to the ball, then that obviously helps that out as well. So I don't think the Eric King is an issue in this game. I think that he's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, and he's not going to be the problem. Charleston Rambo is a guy that could be an X factor in this game because the wide receiver play has been so marginal. Here you've got a guy that had, there's some of these advanced metrics in regards to, explosive plays, and Miami needs to get better on offense and explosive plays. They need to get much better in preventing explosive plays on defense. I was
100%.
looking at that.
That's a great line. That's a great line. Explosive play. I think Miami, was it worse than the ACC?
Yeah, it was down there.
Yeah.
And Charleston Rambo, not necessarily in 2020, but 2019, was a top 10 receiver in the nation in explosive plays. And I saw his numbers. And again, there are so many decimal points involved. I'm not going to try to spit out the numbers, but basically how much better he was than Pope and Wiggins in explosive plays. And just these guys kind of step aside. We know what Harley is. Harley's great in what he does as a slot guy, but in terms of explosive plays, well, Wiggins and Pope have been the guys that they've counted on that have been largely disappointing. Maybe Rambo's the guy that's going to show them how it's done in regards to converting plays downfield, because you're most likely not going to drive the ball 80 yards on Alabama with a 13 or 15 play drive. You're going to need some explosive plays.
100% agree with that statement. I also think you're going to have to score a lot of points off of turnovers. That pick six, or, recover the fumble in the other opponent's territory. Plays like that change the momentum of the game are going to be huge for Miami. Mark, you look at this Miami Hurricanes football team. You stated this looks like a team that's ranked 15 through 25, trying to get over that hump to get to the college football playoffs, win the ACC title. Do you think Miami needs to address some issues in the transfer portal and bring some players in this offseason?
Yes. So the first place I would look would be linebacker.
Yeah.
100%. And you're better to speak to the exact spots on the linebacker core, but certainly we've had the conversations. I've had the conversations with others, and I watch all the games. I saw them play every game last year. I don't think I missed a game. And I think that's the biggest. I think that with the development and improvement at offensive line, which it's still not stellar, but it's capable, it's better, that the linebacking core certainly maybe need number one. There's a guy, Dimitri Moore, out of Vanderbilt, who announced the transfer portal, and they may want to look at him. He had almost 100 tackles 2 years ago. He's a pretty good player.
As an underclassman, too. That's pretty interesting. Now, Mark, inform me, what happened? Because I know the following year, after he got over 90 tackles, right? That following year, did he get injured? What kind of started kind of the departure towards Vanderbilt? Out of Vanderbilt, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, so I don't want to say this for sure, but I believe that it was a COVID-related concern that he had within his family. He played part of the season. He racked up 30 or 40 tackles. He played 4 or 5 games, and then opted out after that.
Interesting. Okay. So Mike Farrell reported today that Miami, was in contact with him, but they're a new school on the rise. So do you think Dimitri Moore, you think he's a plug-in player compared to a guy like Jawan Mitchell? Because that was a hot topic. Manny Diaz did not want Jawan Mitchell basically wanted to commit. Manny Diaz said, hey, We may want to stick with the personnel we have right now. We may not give you. We don't want to give you the green light to commit yet. Do you think Dimitri Moore, 2 years left in his eligibility in the NCAA, do you think he's that plug and player Miami needs, or just be more patient?
I think based on what I know, and I'm not watching a whole lot of Vanderbilt's football, so don't mistake that.
Not a lot of people are.
I can only watch so many games on Saturday, and they're not high on the priority list. And when they are, it's usually a couple drives, and then it's okay. It's 21 zip. Anyway, so for Dimitri Moore, based on if you look at his numbers, I don't know how he was utilized, but he made a lot of plays. He didn't make a lot of disruptive plays. He didn't make a lot of behind the line of scrimmage plays. So again, that may not be him. That may be this style of defense and how he was utilized, or that could be him, that he's a good player, but he's not going to change anything on defense and be that kind of player.
Hey, we'll see in a couple days. I mean, not in a couple days, in a couple weeks, maybe a month. My whole thing is like, if they want Dimitri Moore, just go out and grab him now. I understand a lot of schools are, looking at him, but I still think they're being a little bit patient, just waiting around. They want to take someone from the portal, but just a little bit patient. You never know who can enter the transfer portal. I give the example every time. Georgia, Jamie Newman entered the portal, and they just swarmed at him. De'Ara King, after he commits to Georgia, transfers in. De'Ara King enters the transfer portal, and the rest is history. I don't even think Jamie Newman played a snap at Georgia. They even took JT Daniels as well. So I think just be very patient, and you never know what would come out of the transfer portal. Mark, want to get into the rest of the season for the Miami Hurricanes. What's the outlook? Do you think this is a favorable schedule? I feel like every year it seems like a favorable schedule, and yeah, I mean, I still remember that 2019 season. It was just Florida, and everything else was literally a cakewalk, and it was literally a roller coaster ride.
There are tougher teams in the non-conference, but not to the degree that they should beat Miami. But they're not going to be pushovers, meaning Appalachian State and Michigan State. So if we start there before we get to the ACC, I give Miami roughly a 10% chance of beating Alabama. So I think that's about a 9-1 shot. They most likely lose. They've got App State. They got Michigan State. I think Michigan State first. They got the Central Connecticut game. Obviously, if
not
that's
a bad
an issue,
team. Not a bad team at all. Both of those teams.
Yeah. So Appalachian State, of course, he had the trip there, I think in Mark Richt's first season, and took care of them pretty well. But they've owned the Sun Belt Conference for the most part of the last 5 years. They're really good. Should Miami win? Of course, they should win. They should win by 2 to 3 touchdowns. But that's not a Bethune-Cookman type of game.
Right.
That's one you need to take seriously. Michigan State, I'm interested there because Miami has the potential to win that game big, but Michigan State's not going to be wowed by Miami. They're just not as talented. This is not a good Michigan State team. This is not what Mark D'Antonio built. This is the worst Michigan State team we've seen in the last 13 or 14 years. But they're not going to be they're Big Ten athletes. They're not going to be intimidated. They're going to tackle. They're going to hit. They're going to come after Miami. Miami should win that game, 34-17. They should. But if they're in a fourth quarter game with Michigan State, I'm not going to be surprised. And then you got the typical lineup of the ACC Coastal and, of course, Florida State. And who do they come up against this year? Is it in the Atlantic? Their other
NC State.
NC State. So that's a pretty tough draw there. So
go ahead.
If they lose at North Carolina, and I don't think you should give up on that game by any stretch. North Carolina is not Alabama.
Right.
Just because of what happened last year, things change. And so Miami, I think that's a toss-up game. And I think North Carolina's got the advantage because I think they're slightly better, at least sitting here in May, evaluating slightly better, and they're at home. But, of course, Miami, that may be the game for the division. And then other than that, they really shouldn't lose another game. There's really not an excuse to lose another game. But it is 7-8 games in the ACC plus App State, Michigan State. So if they trip up one other time, I don't think that's a huge indictment on Manny Diaz, that if they go Alabama loss, North Carolina loss, and trip up against one of the other 10 teams on the schedule, 9 of which have a pulse, meaning Central Connecticut State's another deal. That's a scrimmage. But the other 9 that, you go 8-1 in the other, I'm not going to go crazy if they lose to NC State. And if that's the only other trip up and this team's 9-3.
Mark, you won't go crazy if they lose to NC State, but I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina the last
Okay.
3 years, so I'm going to be going crazy. That's the game I'm like, I can't lose to because
Okay. How about
hear
Virginia?
everybody and their mom.
Yeah.
The thing about Mark, I don't know, living when you live outside of the city of South Florida or Miami, there's more Miami Hurricanes fans here. But when you're a Miami Hurricanes fan, out of state, everybody knows who you root for. So all eyes are on you when they're playing. It's the most stressful thing ever. It's much more relaxing. I'm glad to be back home, but it's the most stressful thing ever being out of state and rooting for the Miami Hurricanes because it's I don't know, it's like an aura about Miami. Everybody just wants to see you lose or just make fun of the turnover chain. It's very stressful. But I want to piggyback off of that North Carolina game, Mark, because I feel like this is a big matchup. Because if Miami doesn't beat North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and Sam Howell, he may be arguably the first quarterback off the board. Maybe was it Spencer Rattler out of Oklahoma? He'll be one of either first or second. He's a very good quarterback, probably go in the first round. Bringing back Ty Chandler, Tennessee's leading rusher. It's going to be a solid football team, and Mac Brown's going to have these guys ready to go. Even Phil Longo, he was interviewed for the Alabama OC job or inquired for interest. But Mark, does Miami need to beat North Carolina to win the ACC Coastal?
Well, if they don't beat North Carolina's got to lose 2 games. They do play NC State in the other division. I don't know who else they play in the Atlantic off the top of my head, but most likely, yes, because you're 2 games behind in a sense if you don't win that game head to head on the road. And North Carolina did trip up a couple times this past year against I think Virginia, and I'm trying to think who their other loss in the ACC was, but they tripped up against, Notre Dame was in the conference. So they tripped up against Virginia and Notre Dame and somebody else. But I think it's unlikely that North Carolina trips up twice. So that should be, I'm going to put it this way. If Miami almost definitely needs to win at North Carolina to win the Coastal, North Carolina needs to win that game. It's very important that they win that game, but I would have more confidence in North Carolina being able to overcome that one loss and Miami tripping up twice and North Carolina slipping by with a loss to Miami. But that's the game of the year in the Coastal as it shapes up right now.
Yeah, indeed. Game of the year in the Coastal. And it's an interesting game because Florida State actually beat North Carolina. That's a great point. How did Miami lose by so much if Miami beat Florida State by the same amount? So hey, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be one of those games where they ask me for a prediction. I'm just going to throw up a random one, and I'm not going to know really what's going to happen on game day in Chapel Hill. I'm really not. I plan on going to the game as well. But it's going to be a nail biter. I'm going to be a lot of butterflies in my stomach before those two clash. And I think it's going to be, once again, how has Manny Diaz grown during his tenure? If he still cannot defeat Mac Brown, his former boss, I don't know. Where's the improvement? It's a hard margin to evaluate, and you also have to win your bowl game. So, Mark, I want to ask you, what is the expectation this year for Miami? What's the over-under? 10 wins? 9 wins? How do you see this season play out for the Canes?
I don't know what Vegas has to say about the over-under, but I'm going to guess that it's 8.5. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
So I'm going to state what I just said a second ago in that There's one almost definite loss. There's another team in North Carolina that I'm going to go roughly 60-40 because of where it's played and because I trust North Carolina a little bit more. And then Miami's going to be a substantial favorite in every other game. The game against North Carolina State, they played on the road last year on a Friday night. Did they play at Miami?
Believe it or not, they go North Carolina, NC State back to back, and they play at Miami.
Okay. So they are playing North Carolina State at home.
Yeah.
So they're going to be, again, we're speculating in May, things change, but based on the projection for these teams and where they're supposed to be, Miami's going to be a substantial favorite, meaning a touchdown to 14 points against everybody else that they play outside of Alabama and North Carolina, depending on maybe some road games that tighten up the point spread a bit. So I think this team should go 10-2. I'm probably not going to predict them to quite go 10-2. I'm going to see another loss in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I've overestimated them the last 2 years. People jumped all over me 2 years ago because I picked them to go 8-4 and they went 6-6. I had to hear for 6 months how I was an idiot, and then I overestimated by 2 games. And then last year I picked them 9-3. Of course, they didn't play the other game, but they generally went 8-3 with a bowl loss.
Never go against the voice of college football, man. I love the name. I love Mark Rogers' channel. He does a tremendous job. Go check him out. Mark, do you have a little bit of spare time just for a quick Q&A? The fans love you. They want to hear from you. You're the voice of college football. All right, let's do it.
That'll be a whole lot of
fun. Manny asks, Mr. HD, what does Mark think of our 2 5-star freshmen coming in, Leonard Taylor, James Williams? Maybe you can piggyback off of, Cam, Wholesome one. What do you think about these 2 highly touted recruits coming in?
Well, that's who I was referring to early in the conversation when I said there's a couple dudes stepping on campus soon who are kind of a different, at least based on the hype, and I think they can deliver, are just a different breed than what we've generally seen. And I think this is good for this team, for this roster. I'm not going to state this because I don't know the locker room that well, but I get a feeling that there are a lot of guys that are too comfortable on this roster, and to get pushed by a true freshman, even if they're not I'm talking about not even at their necessarily position, but if they see that dude over there is that good and he's, kicking tail over there, I think that's a great thing for this team to motivate guys that have been around and whatever they've put out has been just good enough and has been decent and okay, and I can still keep my playing time. Now, to be pushed by a couple freshmen, and those aren't the only 2. There are other ones, certainly, that Romello Brinson and others, Jacoby George, who could certainly make an impact. I think it's going to be a breath of fresh air for this roster.
Mark, Manny Diaz taking over play calling duties, gets rid of Blake Baker. What do you think about him as defensive coordinator at Miami?
As long as he can handle it with his other responsibilities.
Yes. As CEO.
Yeah.
That's a tough job, being the head coach of a football program, because there's a lot of mitigating. As defensive coordinator, you just focus on the defense and your personnel on that side, but now you're focusing on the entire organization, the offense, the defense, and everything that comes with it.
Defensive coordinator is not a part-time job. So if you're a defensive coordinator at a big-time school, it's not like you're working 25 hours a week. You're working 90 hours a week as it is just as a defensive coordinator. And then the head coach has to be out shaking people's hands and kissing babies and going to news conferences and talking to booster clubs and doing everything else. And the head coach always has a close relationship with the quarterback and is going to pay attention to the other side of the ball too. It's a lot to ask. It can be done. I just hope he's not. I hope he's not making this decision because he's thinking, well, it was marginal to disastrous at times before, and I got to fix it, so I'm going to do it. Or it's just him not being able to assess properly his time management and the demands on the job and thinking he can do it. That he truly, it can be done. It's been done more on the offensive side by head coaches, so it's possible. But it's a precautionary situation.
Canes Colin asks, how much improvement should the Canes offense be under year 2 under Rhett Lashley? Now remember, 34 points per game. Didn't even have spring football. Everyone's coming back. De'Ara King, another year under this offense. The entire wide receiver core, offensive line. Can Miami hit that 40 points per game mark? It's only 6 points.
6 points against a schedule that's
favorable,
roughly the same, favorable. They're not going to score 40 points a game. And I don't think they're quite going to hit that. I know that you want to see them score. I think it was, if I remember correctly, our conversation, one more touchdown a game.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Just give me 6. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, huh?
I'm thinking about that Virginia game. I'm thinking about a couple other games where the offense just against a marginal defense just didn't look that good. Maybe the development of the running backs weren't the problem, but the running backs could go from really good to with more maturity, exceptional, and Rambo at wideout. No Brevin Jordan, offensive line improvement. I don't see where the offense is that much different this year.
Very well said. All right, I got a couple comments about Bob Shoop being the next defensive coordinator. I'm curious, Mark, have you asked anyone who's follows SEC football, maybe Mississippi State, or a program where Bob Shoop's been defensive coordinator because he had stops at Tennessee, Penn State? What do they think of Bob Shoop? Because I asked someone, I had them on my show. His name was SEC Mike, and this guy is considered an SEC analyst, expert of the conference, and he has a big following. He has 25,000 followers on Twitter. He's got a podcast. If you got that many people, you're informative about SEC football. I asked him about Bob Shoop, and he just laughed. He just laughed and said, "That's where he's at now." What have you heard about Bob Shoop as a defensive coordinator?
I haven't heard enough to be able to go in either direction to endorse. It almost makes me want to really dive into something that I did entering last season, where I looked at Rhett Lashley's offensive production at his previous stops to say, okay, this was the production prior to his stop at Arkansas State. This is what they produced when he was there. This is what they produced after he left, to see what the performance was versus his predecessor and his successor. And then I looked at if there were any, outstanding mitigating factors like a quarterback change, or somebody had a great quarterback, or somebody had just great playmakers and the other coaches didn't. And, I just kind of charted through the video what Rhett Lashley was able to produce at various stops. And I would have to do that with Bob Shoop because he did have 3 high-profile jobs at those 3 schools.
Yeah, no, he was almost a Broyles Award finalist as well. James Franklin, I believe, took him from, was it Vanderbilt or vice versa to Penn State, Tennessee? Where did he take? Basically,
Vanderbilt to Penn State.
Vanderbilt to Penn State, Penn State to Tennessee. Then he won. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, hey, people believe in him. So we'll see what happens. And Burgie says, do you think fans really think Shoop is good for just that he's better than Blake Baker? I think a lot of defensive coordinators are better than Blake Baker. Well, I don't know. D'Onofrio or Blake Baker, pick your poison. I think D'Onofrio might have been better, sadly. I don't know. That's you can go either way. But I'll say this, Mark, it was a pleasure to have you on, to take time out of your evening on a Friday night to come on the show. People love you. You're the voice of college football, and it's an honor to have you on the show and to come on your show as well.
Paul, we appreciate you stopping by on my show. Every time I have needed some additional Miami analysis, I call on Paul, and he has delivered every time. Paul, I hope you know that you're always welcome, and it was an honor to be asked on your show. Thank you so much.
Mark, I greatly appreciate it. I look forward to the next time we can connect on your show again. I'll hold you to it. Take care, everyone, and always all about the U. Go Canes.